Welcome to the Did Nothing Wrong podcast, where we cut through the noise and help you make sense of the chaotic information space around us. I'm Griff Somke. In this episode, I'm joined by Stephanie Kemmerer, a recovering conspiracy theorist who now works with others who've gone down the same rabbit hole and are trying to leave it behind. Stick around.
This is a crusade. This is a holy war against the deep state.
Where are the dictators? Where are the strong men?
Donald Trump is our instrument for retribution.
I'm going to fight for Christians. I'm going to fight for white people.
They have the Great Reset. We have the Great Awakening.
And why shouldn't I root for Russia? Because I am.
I want to see these people go through misery because of their grooming against our children.
After the assailant entered the home asking, "Where's Nancy? Where's Nancy?" Those are the very same words used by the mob when they stormed the United States Capitol.
I did nothing wrong.
Stephanie, welcome to Did Nothing Wrong. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Big fan.
Well, we're glad to have you, definitely. You describe yourself as a recovering conspiracy theorist, and that's a really big thing to say out loud. It seems like the idea of thinking of that in those terms, like something that one recovers from in that sense, is pretty new. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I'm sure there are a lot of people who were into conspiracy theories who are no longer into conspiracy theories, and that wasn't as big of a thing because conspiracy theories weren't as big of a thing. So it's kind of shifted now where more people are being vocal, and I think that's also very important right now to be more vocal.
Right, definitely. And being able to put some distance between yourself and that world seems to have been very important. How long have you been out of the conspiracy theory world?
Well, when we went back to visit the East Coast, I spoke to my friend that pulled me out, and I was like, "Do you guys remember?" And they said, "Yeah, it was February 2017." So I don't have an exact date, but now I have, kind of a timeline.
Okay. So what was your life like before you got red pilled, as it were?
I don't think this was intended or anything, but, only child and female, and my parents couldn't have any more kids after me. So there was a sense of coddling.
Okay.
And I don't think my mom meant to instill me with entitlement, but that's kind of what sort of happened. And, she was always telling me, "Oh, you're going to be rich, you're going to be famous, you're going to be this famous writer." And so I just had it in my head that I deserve everything without needing to work for it.
Huh. Okay. And what drew you in? What would you say was your first kind of exposure to the conspiracy theory world? Where did you start?
It was basically when I was a kid, like Lost Cities and, the Time Life books and the Reader's Digest books. I used to love reading those.
Okay.
And it was like cryptids, UFOs, lost cities. Is Atlantis real? Is psychic ability, is that real?
Right. And from there, you've mentioned that you got into the whole 9/11 truth movement. Do you want to talk a little bit about how that happened?
Yeah. Well, I was working at the Express Times, which is a little newspaper in Easton, PA. I was working there on 9/11.
Mm.
And it was just dumb luck that I was there when it happened because I usually didn't start until noon. But I was filling in for the archivist that day. So that just by dumb luck, I was there when it happened. And I think, anyone who was like in law enforcement or in news, various different jobs that were directly affected by 9/11, I don't think we really got to process it.
Right.
So I was seeing information as it came over the wire, and I was seeing stuff before the general public did, but I couldn't process. And I remember one moment that completely shattered me was when the reports came over about the phone calls of people saying, "We're dying up here. And that just cooked me.
Right. So you were there, you were reading probably the AP wire that was coming across, watching, I'm sure, some CNN. And I remember myself, I was in Berkeley, California that day. I was living there at the time. And just having this completely unsettled feeling of like nobody quite knew what was going to happen next. We didn't know if there were more planes. We didn't know if there were going to be more attacks. There were all kinds of rumors spreading out there. If you were online at all at the time, which I was, you were seeing some of that. And gradually it settled down and we got kind of an idea of what happened. And you're saying that it was very hard for people in your position to have that time for it to settle down and to process what had happened.
Yeah. Yeah. And I actually did have a moment that day where I said to someone I worked with, this feels like an inside job. So, but also again, I was naive and entitled and I wasn't processing what was going on. So I mean, I think everybody, when we saw those towers fall in real time, live, I think everybody had the feeling of it looks like a controlled demolition because it did.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely did. Because I don't think anybody had ever seen anything like that before. The idea that what happens when you fly a plane into a building. Nobody had ever tried this to the best of my knowledge before. And you look at it, you don't know what's going to happen. And this is what happened. And a lot of people, it didn't make sense. A lot of people started from that premise that this doesn't make sense. And it seemed like they went back and sort of looked for like post facto justifications, as it were, for why this thing that they saw didn't make sense, didn't happen the way people were saying it happened.
Yeah.
Instead of sort of reevaluating based on evidence that was coming in, it was more like, we want to find reasons why this wasn't actually what we thought it was.
Yeah, it's like the wrong way to do an investigation. You don't go into a homicide investigation saying this guy did it.
Yeah, you start with a conclusion. I mean, that's not the way to go. You kind of want to see where the evidence leads you. And like I said, I remember seeing it too and thinking, wow, that's really crazy that would happen that way. But after a while, you start to realize, okay, this is possible. This could have happened this way. But there was a definite chunk of people for a number of years who did not believe in that. How long? You said 2017, and this started for you kind of like immediately after 9/11 was when you first found this?
Yeah, but it was a lack of curiosity on my part when around the time I moved out to Ohio around like 2005, and there was already enough information out there. I don't think the NIST report came out until like 2006 maybe, but there was enough real legitimate information out there for me to read. But it's the same dilemma with every conspiracy theorist or everyone who's has the potential for that, where you have this enormous amount of curiosity, but you also have a lack of curiosity.
Right.
So it was like, I wanted to find out how it happened, but I'm not going to bother looking it up. I'll just wait till I find information that makes me feel good.
Okay, that's an interesting way to look at it. So, what other stuff did you find yourself believing at that point, like between those years? What other conspiracy type of beliefs did you have?
Well, the 2005, 2006 era was like that when I was out in Ohio, that was like my first introduction to high-speed internet.
Right.
And so that was a factor, and I was using SoulSeek and I was like, ooh, reptilian.
Huh.
And I was open to the possibility of reptilians, but not like a total believer. And my first David Icke book was shortly after my mom died, and that was Children of the Matrix. And I was like, ooh, this looks crazy and fun.
Hmm.
But that period, I was a dabbler. I didn't necessarily believe everything I was reading, which that was better way to handle it. And when I saw Zeitgeist around 2013, 2014, and they went over the 9/11 stuff that I had already read in a David Icke book about 9/11,
Right.
that was the hardcore period for me. That was the true believer period because I had that dopamine. And I remember even thinking to myself when they're talking about the nanothermite and the controlled demolition, I was like, "Oh, this feels good. I want I want more of this. Give me another hit."
Interesting thinking of it in those terms because I don't think a lot of people really made that connection that, like, this is a dopamine thing, the same as drugs or any number of other things you can do. But you're definitely right that when you've got some sort of idea that you're kind of, some kind of esoteric knowledge that you feel like maybe I'm one of the only people that knows about this, and then you read it somewhere, somebody else is talking about it, and you're like, oh, okay, I get it.
And feeling special was important because the entitlement and low self-esteem, all these things led to a whole string of really bad life choices, really
Right.
bad decisions. And so I was unimportant. I mean, not that I'm important now, but I felt unimportant. I felt unaccomplished. I felt powerless. I felt like I lacked agency. And that led to more and more bad decisions, which led to feeling worse about myself. So I needed something to feel special.
Right. What was the catalyst that made you finally decide to walk away?
In February 2017, about a year and a half after I moved out to California with my former partner, who I'm still friends with, two of my friends came out with their son, and I made a comment like, "I'm not so sure about that Sandy Hook thing. It kind of looks fake." And my friend like made full eye contact with me, and they looked at me and gave me this really disappointed, stern look and said, "I work with a Sandy Hook parent."
Ooh. Yeah, that would cause an immediate reevaluation, I would think, of where you're at with all of this. Why did you feel that way about Sandy Hook? What was it about Sandy Hook, and where did you get the idea that that might have been not what we were told that it was?
Well, I was in what I call the Mr. Brownstone stage, the Guns N' Roses song.
Used to do a little bit, a little didn't do it, so little got more and more.
Yeah. And I had kind of reached the end of the 9/11 conspiracy theories, so I was actively looking for more. And I found a college presentation or lecture by Jim Fetzer,
Okay.
and he started off with the touchy-feely, lovey-dovey, we're all connected stuff, and then he went into Boston bombing and Sandy Hook. I'm not sure if he talked about Sandy Hook in that lecture, but, I was impressed with what he had to say, so then I started finding the Sandy Hook stuff, and my reaction the day that Sandy Hook happened was, "Meh." Like, I just didn't care because I didn't care about anything.
Right. So your friend mentions to you they know somebody who is the parent of a child who was killed at Sandy Hook. What's your immediate reaction there?
I stopped, and I always describe it like in a novel where a character is making a decision and it takes up 2 pages, but in real time, it's only a few seconds. I had that moment and a million thoughts were running through my head, and I had to consider, is my friend lying? Well, I don't think they are, but and then I even said, if they are lying to me, this still illustrates that somewhere out there is someone who has been directly affected by a tragedy. They could be sitting right next to you and you don't know it.
Right.
So whether they were telling the truth or not, it's still the same lesson to be learned.
Right. Right. And how long do you think it took you to go from that point to being out of it, like walking away from it completely?
Well, I think they flew back home, I think 2 days later, but, after I took that moment to think, I apologized. And after they flew back home, I got home from work that day and I Googled 9/11 conspiracy theories debunked because I wasn't ready to look at Sandy Hook. And that's when I found a Miles Power 7-part video and they debunked the main stuff. But in the 7th part, they talked about a mindset of a conspiracy theorist that you keep hitting snooze, you're running late for work, but it's the asshole in front of you. It's their fault, not yours.
Right.
And that resonated. I was like, that's me. I used to try to pass people illegally because I was running late for work because I was dicking around when I shouldn't have been.
Huh. That's an interesting way to look at it. I don't think I made that connection, but interesting. Yeah.
It's the external locus of control and it's that sense of lack of agency.
So what kind of feelings did you end up having to process after you left?
I just, I watched that series and I was like, okay, that's it. I'm done. And I didn't revisit it. I didn't really analyze or look into any of that. And I was just going to let it lie and let it be dead until I saw people absolutely losing their minds on Facebook during COVID. And these were people that I had known in real life. So it was very kind of like personal. And I tried, you know, pushing back on people and be like, hey, I used to be like this. You don't want to do this. And I didn't really know what I was doing. I didn't know how to push back. I didn't have the facts and the logic and the mental health to really combat any of it.
Once you realized that you were lacking some of the skills that you were going to need to effectively push back on this stuff, what was the process for you to develop those skills? You've mentioned that, and you said this the other day on Twitter, having listened to countless hours of Knowledge Fight, QAnon Pod, Behind the Bastards, Did Nothing Wrong, and Conspirituality has greatly helped me boost my mental immunity, empathy, and understanding. I can definitely say that podcasts have been part of my recovery. That's very kind of you to say that. And would you say that that's part of how you learned those skills?
Yeah, at first I started reading like books by Dr. Paul Offit, and in an old Twitter account that's long gone, I found an account called The Real Truther, and he currently hosts a lot of spaces. And that was like my first contact with a person who does these debunkings and stuff. And I read the book by Anna Merlin where she talks about going on the cruise, the conspiracy cruise. And I eventually started writing around 2019 for a podcast. And I was listening to Skullduggery and they were talking about QAnon. I was like, well, I think I should look into this. And that's how I found QAnon Anonymous, because I decided to write an episode for that podcast about QAnon. So I just started typing in QAnon into Spotify and I found QAnon Anonymous and I got hooked on it. And then I got my boyfriend hooked on it. And that was what kind of, because I used to listen to that Time Suck podcast and it just seems so junior. So, it just doesn't like, this is not a good podcast. And QAA kind of set a bar for how I evaluate other podcasts.
Right. They do great work. And, shout out to Travis, who has definitely had some good advice here and there for us, for me. They have definitely kind of opened up a space where there just wasn't anything in that space. They've managed to put a light on some awfully terrible things that were happening at the time and nobody was really talking about up until those guys kind of came along and blew it open. So, yeah, big props to those guys. They do really great work.
Yeah, I think it was maybe 2020. It was a few months before the election, and I was like, I need to write an episode about QAnon to warn people because of the election. And it was not I did not do a good job writing those episodes because I didn't know about it as much.
Right, right. So you mentioned a little bit ago that you feel that things were getting more aggro and harmful in that world, in that milieu. And that was part of the reason why you wanted to come out and say, hey, don't do this. This is a bad idea. And it seems like at one point, this stuff was a whole lot less harmful. Like, I was an Art Bell fan in the 90s, and I worked overnights at a local radio station during his show. So I was running the local board at my local station during Art Bell. So I listened to a whole lot of Art Bell in 97 and 98. And Coast to Coast AM, the show at the time, was probably an entry point for a whole lot of people into that world because Art Bell had such a wide variety of people on his show, and some of whom definitely had some pretty unusual beliefs. And it was a lot less harmful. It seemed almost like whimsical in a way to hear these guys talk about ancient aliens or remote viewing or potential astronaut stuff. And it was very different vibe. If you go back and listen to it from, say, like, for instance, an Alex Jones, when do you think it changed?
I think well, Bell passed away and he was still showing up occasionally not long before that. But I think it really, when he started kind of doing less and George Norrie started doing more,
Right.
and and they brought in George Knapp, and George Knapp is nowhere near as bad as Norrie. But Norrie has the danger of his voice. I could listen to his voice all day. Just that beautiful George Norrie has got a beautiful voice. And there's a danger to how silky smooth his voice was. And he was also bringing in, like, 2013, the day after Boston bombing, Alex Jones was his guest.
Oh, God. Yeah, that would definitely. There was a lot of time in the early teens, it seems, spent mainstreaming Alex Jones as an expert. You go back and watch some of the, the History Channel stuff on ancient aliens and all that, and you've got Alex Jones being quoted like he's a normal human being, or somebody you would actually ask these questions of. And it definitely seems like it very much was something that contributed to the problem later of this guy having as much sway as he had with people.
Yeah.
So how much of this do you think Alex Jones and InfoWars are probably responsible for?
Oh, I don't have I don't have the numbers or the white papers in front of me, but I would say that a lot of just so much of it really was, and you have people like Rogan and Norrie
Oh, yeah.
that gave a wider platform to Alex because he knew when he appeared on when he was playing, he's the home team, but he's not on the home field. So he's going to be a little more cleaned up and he's going to behave a little bit better. And that was bad because that gave people the gateway to InfoWars where they were exposed to a daily barrage of anger and animosity and hatred. I mean, Bill Cooper laid the groundwork for Alex Jones,
Right.
but Alex Jones basically finished the work.
Right, right. And you go from those two guys to a guy like David DePape, who is the man who assaulted and almost killed Nancy Pelosi's husband, Paul, because he believed that Nancy was involved in child trafficking. And he believed this because he spent his entire life at that point sitting in a dark garage watching YouTube content about it. And this is almost, to me, the direct line from guys like Alex Jones that this is where we ended up with these conspiracy folks that are so into that world, and they're either doing it for the money or they're doing it for the clout, but they're making video after video, and there's people who are not stable, who are just consuming this content. And eventually they snap.
Yeah.
And these are the things that happen as a result of this.
And we saw it with Edgar Madison Welch. And I do believe that he did deserve his 4 years in prison. However, I also feel very bad for him because if Alex Jones really believed that there were kids being held at Comet Ping Pong, he would have gone up there himself. But instead, he put out the call for others to do it. And Welch believed this, and Welch went there. He committed acts of violence. Luckily, no one was hurt, but he truly believed.
Yeah.
And that, I don't know what he's doing now that he's out of prison, but I hope to God he had time to really think how badly he was taken advantage of.
Yeah, and Alex wasn't the only one by a long shot who pushed that theory and implied that there was something going on here. There's a video that he later deleted of Jack Posobiec, the Republican rat fucker operative. He goes to Comet Pizza, and he goes in and tries to get them to tell him like what's in the basement, etc. And it's like a long video. It's like 45 minutes and like 3 Periscope segments. And Jack ended up later deleting it, but it's very clear he's like, we're going to go get some pizza and we're going to figure out what's really going on in here. And you do this enough times in front of that impressionable audience that you've primed, somebody is eventually going to be Edgar Welch and show up with a gun. We've seen this happen enough times now that it just doesn't seem like their denials are credible anymore. When they say, well, we didn't ask anyone to do that. Well, it seems like if you know that your fans are going to do it, maybe you've got an obligation to stop putting this kind of content out that makes your fans react a certain way.
And we saw it with Bridge Guy after Delphi. Everyone wanted to figure out who Bridge Guy was. And, you listen to all these true crime podcasts and they kept saying, please stop doing side-by-sides. And, there were all these people that were declared to be Bridge Guy, and they weren't.
So walk me through this real quick. Tell me who Bridge Guy was and how this came up.
He was the man who murdered 2 teenagers in Delphi, Indiana.
Okay.
And this was back in 2017. And they believe that one of the victims had their Snapchat open at the time of the murder, so they live streamed their own homicide.
Ugh.
And there was all this evidence, and they snapped a picture of this guy walking on the bridge shortly before the murders happened.
Okay.
So they had a photo of this guy, and they also had, witness composite drawings. And so everybody wanted to find out who Bridge Guy was. And they even had an audio recording of him saying down the hill, telling the girls to go down the hill where they would eventually be murdered. People were like analyzing audio, people were analyzing photos, and they just kept landing on the wrong people.
Yeah, and that's the kind of thing that happens, it seems, whenever anything like this comes up, is immediately people have to jump on it. They have to put, a name out there. They have to put this person's information out there and come up with a narrative almost right away. We've seen this with practically every mass shooting that's happened in the last, unfortunately, few years. There's been so many that the immediate thing they do as soon as they have a name is just throw somebody out there. And it doesn't matter if it's right. We saw that with the one in Maine not that long ago. We saw that in Texas with the shooter who shot up the mall. It just seems like people want to be talking about it. And this is one of the ways that they do it, is just jump on it and throw some stuff out there. And it's very harmful, obviously, because most of the time they're wrong. So you end up with these people who end up with their lives ruined in some cases as a result of this.
Yeah. And, you also, in 2012, with Sandy Hook, you saw people taking it into the real world.
Yeah. And that's part of why this was such a big, Alex Jones needs to answer for this, because if not for InfoWars and Alex Jones constantly repeating for years that this was fake, the average person is not going to go out and harass these people.
Yeah.
They have enough decency to understand that, like, these people had one of the most horrible tragedies happen that can possibly happen to you. And the last thing they need is somebody coming up and telling them that their kid was a crisis actor.
Yeah. There's a Vice News article about a Parkland survivor whose own father accuses them of being a crisis actor.
Wow.
And the father was pilled by Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Parkland was interesting because I remember the night that happened, and I was online and I was watching certain real bad right-wing actors intentionally spreading bad information and chaos. I was watching a specific gentleman who used to post under the name of Microchip, was out there whipping people up to just, shit the entire pool up with nonsense information. And it was very, like, do you not have a conscience or something? Do you just not have any level of, like, what kind of human are you that you would do this? It's crazy.
Yeah. That's why I never carried it into the real world.
Right. So how do you maintain, like, a healthy sense of skepticism, but not end up back in that rabbit hole or, enthralled to somebody who's figured out how to manipulate people who are trying to leave that world? Because there's people out there like that.
For me, I try to, ground myself with, I can, my spidey sense can detect, well, this sounds like conspiracy theory talk. Oh, but it's left-wing conspiracy theories,
Right.
but it's still a conspiracy theory. So that was, that for me is, and it's important for people to understand, conspiracy theories are not just right wing. I considered myself a lefty when I was into all this stuff, but if you, and we've seen it with specific people who do these things, you can call yourself a leftist, but if you involve yourself in conspiracy theories, you're going to drift right. You are going to drift right. And for a while, I was kind of into like the Blue Anon Twitter stuff, and it's okay to mock people as long as it's like Republicans that you're mocking. And no, that's shit libbery, and that's not right.
Right. I have no problem mocking the top level people that are involved in that. Like, I mean,
Yes.
There's no prohibition, at least in my mind, about mocking a Roger Stone or a Jack Posobiec. Those guys absolutely have it coming. They're rat fuckers, they're political operatives, and they have it absolutely coming as far as I'm concerned. But somebody who might be buying the propaganda that those guys are selling, that doesn't need mockery. That needs somebody to sit down and talk to them about what's going on.
And for me, one of the things was one of those big Blue Anon follow back resistance accounts had made a post. I hope Max Azzarello gave Trump a hug.
Oh.
And Dapper even pointed it out. He was like, "Don't be like this."
Yeah.
And then one of the other accounts, Maya or something, posted a picture of Trump like eating like a chocolate covered banana, saying, "Oh, he's getting ready for prison." And there's coded racism in there. It's one thing to mock Trump. It's another thing to say that a man who self-immolated should have given Trump A hug?
Right.
What?
That's like,
Uh,
no, sorry.
and saying you hope Trump gets sexually assaulted by a black man in prison? No.
Prison rape jokes are never funny. The official
No.
position here is that prison rape jokes are never funny, and it's not something that anybody should joke about ever, because it's not funny.
Right.
It's an awful thing. And joking about it doesn't make you a good person. In fact, it makes you really kind of an asshole, regardless of how awful the other person you're joking about it with is. It's just not something that decent people do or think is funny. And if you think it's funny, then maybe you should go reevaluate your own life choices as to why you think that's funny.
Yeah, and the thing with Marjorie Taylor Greene being the J6 bomber, and the whole thing of what's in Ivanka's casket. A body's in the casket. Okay, a body.
Yeah, seriously, it's like, this doesn't help anything. When these people spread
No.
these kinds of stories, it's like, this helps nothing. What do you expect to happen as a result of this? You have no proof that Marjorie Taylor Greene did anything of the sort. You have some grainy video and some still shots, and that's about all. But for whatever reason, you're convinced that she did this, and her constituents think it's funny to some extent that you're obsessed with all of this. And
Yeah.
you're making yourself look incredibly dumb because you believe all of this stuff that has no evidence whatsoever to back it up. You need to take a step back and ask yourself, like, who's telling you this? Why are they telling you this? What is their motivation? What could it be? Does the person who is making all of this stuff up live and die off of their engagement? Does the person who is making all of these things up have anything else going that they make a living from? Or are they specifically getting paid these days because they want the clicks? Because they can get you to click on their links and get you to circulate their content? And do you think maybe you might be being rage farmed as a result of this? Those are the questions I'd like to see people ask themselves. Like, what is the motivation behind posting something with no evidence whatsoever that is so over the top? Like, Marjorie Taylor Greene did the DNC and RNC bombings. What is that? What does this hope to accomplish? And
Yeah.
once you have kind of answered that question, take a look at what else that person fed you in terms of content, and ask yourself those same questions along those same lines. Is this something that they believe, or is this something that they've figured out how to monetize?
Yeah. And I tell people, if you see something and you're not sure, double check,
Mm-hmm.
especially if it fits your own narrative.
Yeah.
Double check.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you came up with a really brilliant idea and acronym, which is DOUBT, discussing our unusual beliefs together, for the first step in the process of getting people who are currently in that world to examine their ideas. Can you talk about this and kind of how you came up with that? Because that's great.
It was Brent Lee from the Some Dare Call It Conspiracy podcast, and former QAnon follower Jatarth Jadeja. We did like a YouTube podcast episode together, and the whole purpose was three former conspiracy theorists kind of talking about the good old days, and there were some warm, glowy feelings that we experienced, and let's relive them without falling back in.
Right.
And I decided to kind of expand that on my own through the American Information Integrity Alliance, which is in the process of forming as a 501c3. I'm not sure how much is going on with that. We haven't had a meeting in a while. Everyone's busy. So I basically I put there's a form to contact me directly on the AIIA website.
Okay.
But I also, try to get the word out, and I explain to people it's not a rope to pull you out. It's a ladder to help you climb out. I'm not going to drag you kicking and screaming. If you feel like you're ready to get out, if you're already out, if you have a loved one that's still in, reach out to me. And sometimes I'll only talk to someone once or maybe twice, but they just need someone to hear their story.
Yeah, yeah, and somebody who can listen, with a fresh set of ears, but they've been in that situation before. And it definitely seems like you have kind of come to something where we're not trying to tell people that you need to get out of this or like to pull you out. It's more of a like, you have to pull yourself out. You have to find the way out of this for yourself, but we will definitely, support you while you do that. We will definitely provide like a sounding board for you and, your ideas on this. You mentioned another group when we were talking before. I believe they were called Honor.
Yes.
Can you tell me a little bit about what that is and what they're doing?
Honor is run by Leonard Posner. He's the father of the youngest Sandy Hook victim, Noah.
Okay.
And because Leonard is computer savvy and Jewish, he had become the biggest target of Wolfgang Halbig and Jim Fetzer, Tony Mead, all of these really crazy, like these are the people with the bullhorns
Right.
going after people in real life. And so his organization helps people who are victims of like cyberbullying and harassing. And so I help him go through some of the emails and, I'll look at it and I'll be like, okay, this is what needs to be done with this. And then I'll kind of put it back to him because he has more of, he has the direct lines with some of the platforms to report this stuff.
Right.
Because of working with all these platforms for so many years, he's able to report things much easier. So, I'll look over it and I'll be like, okay, here's this, or, I'll pull up some information about the person that the complaint is based on, and I'll kind of send it back to him.
Right.
And that's super fun because it's like I get to be a conspiracy theorist again.
Yeah, but not really. Without all the bad parts.
Right. And I get to help someone, and like I said, I never took my stuff into the real world. I mean, I marched with Anonymous in 2016 and I was bullhorning. 9/11 was an inside job at the time. And that was just one day that I did that. But I wanted to reach out to his organization and just tell him my story and be like, do you need a former to help you?
Right. And what was his response? How did he feel about that?
He was like, can I call you?
Nice.
And at the end of the call, I said, I'm sorry that you lost your son, and I'm sorry that all this stuff happened, and I'm sorry that I used to think it was fake. And that felt good.
Right. And he responded pretty well to that?
Yeah, he thanked me. He's very stoic, which I think has helped him get through all of this.
Right. Right. Yeah, because I mean, again, like I said, that's the most unimaginable thing is the idea that this could have happened. And when Sandy Hook happened, it was a lot less common. It was not something that had been mainstreamed and was something we were seeing every other day for a while. So I'm really glad to hear that he's healing from all of that, because that's just the kind of thing that, some people never manage to come back from at all. So good for him.
And he still has to kind of hide. In fact, the HBO documentary was the first time showing his face on camera. He would always appear hidden,
Right.
in shadows, and he took a chance with that, and there's bravery in that.
Yeah.
And he still has the people doing it to him to this day, and it's like, what are you trying to prove? This was this year will be the 12th anniversary, and what, and it's like the people who are still trying to prove 9/11 was an inside job. Number one, it wasn't. And number two, even if it was, it's 23 years ago. And if in order to orchestrate these events, there would have to be, even with like Sandy Hook and 9/11, it's all Illuminati stuff, even if you don't realize it.
Yeah.
So, and even when I was a conspiracy theorist, I would sit there and I'd be like, that Illuminati stuff, that's bullshit. And people would be like, what do you mean? I'm like, Illuminati in Area 51. If the Illuminati exists and they're that powerful, we wouldn't know their name.
Right.
And, and Area 51, if there ever really was any alien technology there, we wouldn't know what Area 51 is.
Yeah. Yeah, really. If the Illuminati were as in charge as people seem to think they are, there's no way you're posting about it on your little website. There's just none.
Right. And if the Illuminati did Sandy Hook and 9/11, do you think any of your investigations are going to have any effect?
No.
Really?
No, they're not. Yeah, that's just, they don't think it through a lot of the time when they start talking about this stuff. And it's like, you're really telling me that this group that runs the world couldn't figure out how to deal with you. Okay. I'm not buying that, but okay.
Yeah. And I don't know enough about it to say whether anything hinky is going on there. But I mean, you blow a whistle at Boeing and
Oh, yeah. That didn't look good. That didn't look good at all.
And it doesn't look good. I don't know enough about it to weigh in on it, but that's just a company. So the Illuminati is supposed to be way more powerful than them.
Uh-huh.
If Alex Jones was really that right, and Bill Cooper had the, he had the joy of dying for his beliefs.
Right.
And, that his last thoughts were probably, wow, this is going to look really good for me.
Yeah. And, Bill Cooper, that's another guy who influenced a whole generation of not just like right wingers, but the amount of like hip hop folks who were really into Behold a Pale Horse that just got into that.
So many.
They were like, I remember hearing about that book back in like the mid 90s. And people, oh, this just explains everything. And it's like, oh boy, I'm always wary of somebody who's got the book that explains everything. But it definitely caught on in some areas you wouldn't have expected it to catch on in. And there's a really good article or two about that. We'll link that in the show notes. But if you want to kind of go back to some of the conspiracies here, Behold a Pale Horse by Bill Cooper is one of the source material books that generated a lot of what you're hearing now.
Yeah, and there's a good biography about Cooper called Pale Horse Rider.
Did not know about that. I'll have to check that out. So who are some of the other people who are doing good work in the space of helping people walk away from this stuff?
I think Brent Lee is doing good work because he's got a very public persona. He's gotten a lot of attention, and I think that's good because that's also what I'm trying to do. There's also a passive activism where just the existence of other former conspiracy theorists lets people know that it's okay to walk away.
Right.
And it's important because when you're in conspiracy theories, it is like a cult that your normal friends have stepped away because you're going crazy. So now all your new friends are conspiracy theorists. So if you want to walk away from the conspiracy theories,
then you're really isolated at that point.
Yeah. And, mocking is an effective tool, but it's also important to know that there are people out there who, you need a friend when you come out. I'll be your friend.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's really good to know. That's really good for people who are dealing with this kind of stuff to have out there in the back of their mind as they decide they're going to try and walk away from this. How can people support you and the work that you're doing out here?
I suggest that people, volunteer for honor or send a donation of honor or, subscribe to Amanda's Patreon, subscribe, I don't even ask people to subscribe to mind because I don't write on it that much. But just, support the people who are doing other work, even if it's subscribing to a podcast or giving it 5 stars, do that, because
Right.
anyone who's out there trying to derad or trying to help others, or like Amanda going undercover, or Sarah helping with cult stuff, find those people and just,
Yeah.
give them a boost.
Those two are incredibly brave. Both of them. Stuff that
Oh,
they've
yeah.
done. Like, just, it's amazing. Stephanie, thank you for joining me today. This has been enlightening. I'm glad we got to talk about this, and I definitely learned a lot talking to you about where this is all gone and where this is all going.
And if anyone wants to contact me, it's doubtisthewayout@proton.me.
Doubt is the way out at proton.me. Definitely. And, you're out there every day kind of putting it out there, talking to people about this stuff. And thank you for doing that. It's very helpful and very necessary at this point with where we're at.
Thank you. I'm weird with compliments these days, but thank you.
No, you can take them. It's definitely something you earn. So
my main thing is I've been a fuck up loser for most of my life. You don't have to be like that. You can change your life for the better and be a better person. You don't have to wait until you're in your 40s to do it like I did.
Right. Well, thank you very much today, Stephanie. I appreciate your time. You have a great rest of your day, okay?
You too. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for listening to the Did Nothing Wrong podcast. If you want to hear more, you can find us on the web at didnothingwrongpod.com. Please make sure you subscribe to get our content straight into your inbox. You can also follow us on Twitter at GrizaBJJ, GRZABJJ, as well as DNWPod. We're extremely grateful for paid subscriptions and donations that allow us to keep doing this important work. Thanks, and remember, everyone mentioned did nothing wrong.